Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Tarek and continuing the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and somehow the entire month of September has already gone by. It is the last Thursday in the month, and you know what that means. It's time for the MiSTer Monthly News Roundup. And to say September was a big month would be an understatement. It's been one of the best months for MiSTer FPGA all year round. And as we get into next month, October being spooky season, I'm sure there's going to be even more fun in store. But I'm going to tell you every single thing that happened this month and why you should care about it. Before you get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. And odds are at least some of you watching this are going to be new to the channel because you just got your first MiSTer FPGA, because Taki Udon and his company have been shipping the MiSTer Pi. I got my review unit at the beginning of September, and I know a lot of people have either already received their deliveries or are receiving them as you watch this. I went over all the hardware, I did a full build guide and talked about how this is going to expand the MiSTer FPGA ecosystem, getting a lot more people into FPGA gaming at a lower price point. And that's always something great for pretty much every sort of gaming niche. The more people that are playing, the more supporters there are, the more Patreon dollars there are for creators of cores, and maybe even more core makers will come over to the MiSTer FPGA side of things and start producing new fun cores. And while MiSTer FPGA was worth every penny when it was a $400 to $500 project, having it underneath $200 is just going to allow that many more people to actually get involved. And if you haven't yet been able to order the Taki Udon MiSTer Pi, more batches will be coming, and I'll do an update video when those start going out so you guys know when you should be ordering. But honestly, it's been so much fun to demo this hardware, and I have done some comparison tests as well. Check the playlist if you haven't seen those yet. And in my use of the Taki Udon MiSTer Pi, I have not had any issues whatsoever compared to real MiSTer FPGA hardware. Every single core has run every single game I've thrown at it, and at this point in time I would probably just use it for my main capture hardware, but it just hasn't kind of gone into my rotation as of yet. But honestly, I could put the MiSTer Pi in my capture chain versus Terasic made hardware and tell you guys it was the same MiSTer FPGA experience you would be getting if you had that Terasic board. And again, if you want to see more of the comparisons, I've done 2 different videos and basically everything has been 100% par for me. And this is definitely exciting, and I can't wait to see what other hardware Taki Udon is going to come out with. He still has the flagship, the different console, the handheld MiSTer FPGA, which I'm mostly excited about out of all the different hardware. But again, I'm just happy that there's going to be more MiSTer FPGA users out there. Not only will that maybe mean more views for me, selfishly of course I do think about that, but it means a lot of people out there getting their first MiSTer FPGA this year, so welcome to the club and I hope you stick around. Now moving over to the Sega Saturn core, we've seen updates on this as well from SRG 320, and additionally we have some other people helping him, and they've added in mouse support to the core. Obviously we don't have light gun support yet, and that's what I would love to play Virtual Cop 2 with here, but getting a mouse functionality in the core is definitely a hell of a lot better than trying to use a D-pad, that's for sure. And of course, we've seen other updates come to the Sega Saturn core in September, giving us new features and better gameplay in certain games, and it is fun to continue to follow along with the Sega Saturn's development process, because we've been doing video previews almost 2 years now on this core, and it definitely hasn't gotten old whatsoever, and everyone's always excited to see a new core coming. As of the recording of this video, Wednesday morning versus Thursday morning when you're watching it, we are still on the previous core. Nothing's updated since then, but I have a feeling that we're going to get another Sega Saturn core update probably early in October. I have no reason to believe that other than it's just what my gut tells me, so we'll have to wait and see how close I am. And do be aware that mouse support does work in a lot of different games, a lot of diverse games. Something like Police Knots might not be the first game you think of when you think of using a mouse on Sega Saturn, but it definitely works, and it should be one of the games you definitely think about. Another game you should think about when you think of mouse support is the original Virtual Cop, and while neither of these games, Virtual Cop or Virtual Cop 2, are as good as their Model 2 arcade PCB counterparts, they're some of the games I played the most back in the day on Sega Saturn, and I still keep a Saturn hooked up to my PVM next to me with the light gun very close when I want to play those titles. And I know everyone's waiting for light gun support, maybe that'll come in October, we'll just have to wait and see, but in the interim, having mouse capabilities on the core is definitely something that is a huge bonus. It'll work for stuff like the House of the Dead as well, and if I remember, and I usually don't, I will leave a link below to all of the different games that do function with a mouse on Sega Saturn, because it's surprisingly a longer list than you would think. Now sticking with SRG 320 but moving to a completely different core, he updated the Super Nintendo core, giving us more functionality and some fixes to some games. And I have not talked about the Super Nintendo core on the channel for probably over 2 years, because it's kind of been one of those lock cores where everything minus one game needed a patch to work, and we basically had a 100% 100% cycle accurate Super Nintendo on MiSTer FPGA. But recently Infidelity released Super Mario Bros. Maker, and based on how that used RAM and some additional RAM, it did not function on the MiSTer FPGA core. So SRG 320 came in and made sure that that worked. It is still a little bit glitchy, but it can do that on real hardware as well. Additionally, there are some updates that you can now play some Satellaview games with the specialized ROMs. You will need the Satellaview BIOS loaded in, but this kind of expands the overall Super Nintendo library, giving you some more fun games to check out. And if you don't know of the particular games on Satellaview, definitely look up a list, because there's a lot of fun games you maybe have never experienced before, and for the most part, you definitely didn't experience them back in the day unless you're living in Japan and listening to this, because the Satellaview service with 8 GB was only available in Japan. Also, we got a new improvement here. Rendering Rangers no longer needs a patch to work on the core. This was one of the very few games that had issues in the existing core, and SRG 320 has also gone in and completely cleaned that up, so now you can just load the stock ROM like you would any other game. But it's always fun to see a maker come back to work that we all considered finished and basically just add in some new features. And it's not like SRG 320 hasn't been busy. Obviously he's making the Sega Saturn core, but maybe he just needed a little bit of a break and wanted to come over and improve some things over here. Kawasaki Superbike is also going to be a game that's now working properly in the core, and I never remember testing this back in the day. It's not even a game that I really remember being on the Super Nintendo, but apparently it did have issues when it came to running on the core. So in this most recent Super Nintendo update, you got that additional RAM rework, so you could play Super Mario Bros. Maker, Rendering Rangers is working, some Satellaview games are working, and this Kawasaki Superbike game is working as well, so that's always fun to see. And apparently the middle of this video is just SRG 320 territory, because we also got an update to the Sega 32X core as well this month. Some of the freezing issues in Knuckles Chaotix have been fixed, and now you can basically just play this game exactly like you would expect to play on real 32X hardware. And if you don't own 32X hardware, it's really not, in my opinion, super worth it for the game library, but on MiSTer FPGA, being able to play it is a ton of fun. Because while Knuckles Chaotix is not the best 2D Sonic game ever made, it does have a lot of charm, and basically, at least in this track sequence here, if you let it run too long, it would end up freezing the core and the game, and you'd have to reload everything and start again. So it's great to see SRG 320 popping back and forth between 32X and Sega Saturn, even if the Saturn is definitely the primary focus, it seems. Additionally, some games did not used to work within the 32X core, and now they're going to work. Getting another WWF game, especially one with Razor Ramon, is definitely nothing you would complain about whatsoever. And while this one doesn't really exactly show the overall power of the 32X, it is a fun and expanded on version of the game. And of course it has Doink the Clown, and everyone's gonna love that. But it's one more game on the 32X core that is not done yet. It's still in development, that now works and never did before. So we're getting really close to a 100% playable and completable library on 32X, and I can't wait to see additionally what other improvements come maybe towards the end of this year into 2025. But if you never played the 32X before, definitely start checking it out on MiSTer FPGA. And a prototype unreleased game for Pinocchio that didn't used to work in the core also works now as well. Definitely not the most exciting prototype, it really is an unfinished game, but it kind of shows you that there was more games in development for 32X than we ever got, and that's just because the overall hardware did not succeed on store shelves, so a lot of games that were in development were cancelled because developers and publishers didn't want to take the risk of trying to be profitable on a system that really didn't have a great install base. Now, speaking of systems that didn't really have a great install base that are now on MiSTer FPGA, we have the work in progress CD-i core from Slamy. I did a preview of this on Monday, and I've got another video testing more games that you guys requested, but honestly, the CD-i was not on my dance card for 2024. I kind of never thought we'd actually see a core for this piece of hardware. It definitely is a system I don't have a lot of knowledge with, and it is not in my collection. I was kind of hoping we'd see 3DO first, but honestly getting a new core is always a fun time, and it is a new piece of hardware in code that we can do some new previews on. And while the CDI was not successful, and I would say there's no real hidden gem on the platform, some games like Hotel Mario here are fun to play from a gameplay standpoint, and from a Nintendo history standpoint, it's really fun to look at all of the Legend of Zelda games that were not made by Nintendo, and that's just because Nintendo had a licensing deal with Philips to make a CD-ROM attachment for the Super Nintendo after Nintendo 100% bailed on Sony and screwed them over back in the day. Part of the deal was Philips was able to produce some games with Nintendo properties, and that ended up being transferred over to the CDI. So playing something like Zelda the Wand of Gamelon here is possible on CDI, and now it is possible in this work in progress core. but as I mentioned in Monday's video, this is not the type of core in its current state that you're going to play a game from start to finish and be able to beat it. Some games don't load whatsoever, some games work well but freeze, some games have graphical corruption. This is still the early days of CD-i, so I don't want anyone to think you can just sit down and complete Zelda the Wand of Gamelon from start to finish. It really isn't going to work like that. But what is currently on offer here is super impressive, and getting another platform on MiSTer FPGA is never anything to scoff at. And considering we really only have stuff like a completed Jaguar core, a 3DO core, and PCFX core, outstanding when it comes to consoles from this generation, MiSTer really did need that CDI core, and it is in development. It is not an update all as of yet. You'll have to go to the MiSTer Discord server, go to the CDI channel, and download the core from the pin messages. But if you want to play some CDI on MiSTer today, it's not a perfect experience, but it's here and it's awesome to see. Now last but not least is definitely Jotego. He brought out the new Geo Pocket Color core at the beginning of the month, and he has updated it at the end of the month, giving us some more playable games. And this, just like all the other work in progress cores, is not anything that is finished. There's going to be glitches, there's going to be freezing, there's going to be graphical corruption, but it is the start of Neo Geo Pocket Color on MiSTer FPGA, and that is awesome because we already have Neo Geo Pocket, the non-color version, and while that definitely isn't 100% complete either, getting another system on MiSTer FPGA is always a fun time. And the Neo Geo Pocket Color always has a lot of fun games to play on it, and it's probably another one of those platforms that not everyone is well versed with out there. But tell me down below, do you own a Neo Geo Pocket or Pocket Color, and what is your favorite game on it? For me, it's 100% Dark Arms Beastbusters. That game just is such a fun pivot on the Lycon formula in arcades. And while again the Neo Geo Pocket Color core isn't perfect, it is here and it is fun to play around with. Just be aware that you do need to be a Jotego beta member to be able to get the cores and the keys to run this right now. It'll probably go public maybe like 3 to 4 months after it's complete for those beta members. But there's a lot of fun to be had on Neo Geo Pocket Color, and some games like Sonic here really feel like you're just playing the real hardware, but it's going to be hit or miss depending on what game you're playing, what sort of performance you're going to get out of it. Some Neo Geo Pocket games don't even load right now, other games play exactly like you would expect them to, and I'm sure the compatibility and performance will definitely get better as Jotego and his team update this core in the future. But right now, if you want to check out Neo Geo Pocket Color, you can 100% do so. And one other thing on the Jotego front this month, WWF Superstars came out as an arcade ROM. And while this game definitely is a little bit old compared to some of the other things we're talking about in this video timeline-wise, it is a ton of fun arcade wrestling game from Technos Japan, and it is just one of those absolute classics. It's always fun to get more arcade cores, because honestly the arcade side of MiSTer FPGA a little quiet this month. It was definitely a lot more going on the home console and handheld side of things, but you know I have to include at least one arcade game in every MiSTer News video so long as there's one arcade core out, and it's been absolutely awesome to see something like this happen. But otherwise, hopefully in October we see even more arcade love, because you know, as much as I love handhelds and consoles, arcade really is where my heart lies, especially on the MiSTer FPGA side of things. And while I don't expect to see any huge arcade cores as far as multis come out this year, hopefully in 2025 we might see some CPS3 or some PGM from Jotego and his team. But right now, if you want to play WWF Superstars, you can 100% do it. You just need to still be a beta member. But for the most part, that's what happened in the MiSTer FPGA ecosystem this month. I hope I didn't forget everything. There's all sorts of videos always going around and all sorts of information that I want to impart on you. But we got MiSTer clones, we got a new Super Nintendo core, a new Saturn core, 32X core, so much fun, even a CDI core, which I don't think anyone would have guessed at the end of August. And we'll see what happens in October, November, December, because we're in the back quarter of the year. But short of that, if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I'll try to answer each and every one of you. MiSTer FPGA is having a great month, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.